Before I tell you this story, I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what I'm about to share with you is not a movie, it is not something I read in a novel. This is real. This happened, and by the time I finish, you are going to feel something. I promise you that. He had more money than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. He had power, he had charm, and he had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the entire world. And for a while, she believed him. She loved him completely. She gave him 2 children, 2 beautiful lives. And when she asked for just one thing, not a mansion, not a diamond ring, just a last name, just a choice, he went silent. That silence cost him everything. This is her story, and I am going to tell it the way it deserves to be told. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because we tell stories on this channel that the world tries to keep quiet. Stories about love, power, and what happens when the two collide. Now let's get into it. My name is Camille, and before I met him, I had a life I was proud of. I was 31 years old, running my own interior design consultancy in Cape Town. Not a side hustle, a real business with real clients, hotels, private estates, corporate buildings. I had built it from nothing, from a small apartment with a drawing table and a dream that refused to stay quiet. I was not rich, but I was free, and that freedom meant everything to me. I was not looking for love the night I met him. I wasn't even supposed to be at that gala. My business partner had an emergency and asked me to represent our firm at a fundraiser for a children's literacy foundation. I put on my best dress, showed up, shook hands, and was honestly counting the minutes until I could leave. And then I heard him laugh. Not at me, just across the room. This deep, full laugh that didn't care who heard it. I turned around, and there he was, Nathaniel. Tall, dark suit, glass of wine in his hand, talking to a group of people like he owned the air around him, which in many ways he did. He was a third-generation shipping and agriculture magnate, one of the wealthiest men on the African continent. His family name was on buildings, on foundations, on the lips of politicians. But none of that is what caught my attention. What caught my attention is that when someone introduced us 20 minutes later, he put his phone in his pocket before I even finished saying my name. He looked at me, not at my dress, not past me at someone more important, directly at me. And he said, "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with what you do for a living." Nobody had ever asked me that. I stayed 3 more hours at that gala, not for the foundation, not for my firm, for that conversation. He was smart and curious and funny in a way that didn't perform. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. By the end of the night, I felt like I had known him for years. He called the next morning. He said he hadn't slept because he kept thinking about something I'd said. I laughed because I hadn't either. That was the beginning. What followed was the most intoxicating season of my life. Private dinners on rooftops, weekends in Zanzibar and Marrakesh, long phone calls at 2 in the morning where we talked about everything: childhood, fear, what we wanted the rest of our lives to look like. He was generous and present, and when it was just the two of us, he was the most genuine person I had ever known. But it was always just the two of us. I noticed it slowly at first, the way you notice a small crack in the ceiling. You glance at it, tell yourself it's nothing, and go back to your life. He never posted anything about me. He never brought me to family events. When I met his friends, it was always casually, always in settings that could be explained away as coincidence. We were never introduced as a couple. I was always just Camille, standing nearby, belonging to nothing official. I told myself he was a private person. I told myself that men like him lived carefully because the world watched them closely. I made excuses so elegant and so convincing that I almost believed them myself. But deep down, Underneath all the beautiful trips and the late-night conversations, I felt it, that quiet, cold thing that lives in the space between what someone says and what they actually do. He made me feel like the most important woman in the room, as long as the room had no witnesses. A year and a half passed like this. I loved him. I genuinely, fully loved him, and I believe in his own complicated way, he loved me too. But love without commitment is just a feeling, and feelings, I was about to learn, do not protect you. I found out on a Tuesday morning. I took the test 3 times because I didn't trust the first result. Then I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time, just breathing. I wasn't panicking, I was calculating, trying to figure out what this meant, what he would say, what would happen to the careful, beautiful, hidden world we had built. When I told him, he went very still. Not angry, not happy, just still, like a man doing math in his head. He asked me how far I was. He asked if I was sure. Then he was quiet for a moment that felt like an hour, and then he said, "I'll take care of everything." Not we, not us. He said, I. 2 weeks later, I found out it was twins, a boy and a girl, and something inside me cracked open in the most beautiful and terrifying way. These were my children. These were real lives, growing, and no amount of silence or secrecy was going to change that. Nathaniel moved quickly. He found a private doctor, a private clinic, a security arrangement that would keep everything out of the press. He set up a fund that covered all my expenses. He was efficient and thorough and completely in control. And somewhere in the middle of all that efficiency, I realized he had never once held my hand and said, "I am happy about this." He treated my pregnancy like a situation to be managed, not a miracle we had created together. I was still the secret. Now I was just a secret with a larger budget. I swallowed that pain and I kept going because the babies were coming, whether the world was ready or not. They were born on a rainy April morning. 5 pounds each, perfect and screaming and impossibly small. Nathaniel was in that delivery room. I want you to know that. He did not disappear. He was there, in scrubs, holding my hand through the worst of it. And when the nurses placed them in his arms for the first time, this man, this powerful, controlled, careful man, cried. Not small, polite tears. He cried the way a person cries when something breaks them open in the best possible way. In that moment, I was sure. I told myself, this is it. This changes everything. You cannot hold your children and still choose to hide them. I named them Lena and Samuel. He visited every week, sometimes twice a week. He brought things, good things, thoughtful things, not just expensive things. He learned how to change nappies and how to soothe Samuel when he cried at night. He sat on the floor and played and laughed and was, by every visible measure, a devoted father. But he never stayed the night. He never introduced me to his mother. He never mentioned us, not once, to the world that was watching him. His public life continued clean and unbothered. Business deals, charity appearances, even a magazine profile where they described him as one of Africa's most eligible bachelors. I read that article sitting in the nursery while our twins slept, and I kept telling myself the lie I had been rehearsing for 2 years. He just needs more time. He is getting there. He loves us. That has to be enough. But it was not enough. It was never going to be enough. Lena and Samuel turned 2 in April. They were walking, talking, pointing at his photo on my phone and saying "Daddy" with this complete and uncomplicated joy that only small children are capable of. And one evening, after he had put them to bed and we were sitting in the kitchen, I looked at him and I asked the question I had been swallowing for 3 years. "Nathaniel, what are we? What am I to you? Where is this going?" He didn't flinch. That was the thing that hurt the most. He had clearly thought about this moment and prepared for it. He spoke calmly and carefully, the way he spoke in boardrooms. He talked about his family's expectations. He talked about legacy and responsibility and the weight of a name that carried 100 years of history. He talked about timing and complications and how much he respected me. He never said I love you, not once in that entire conversation. And then he slid a piece of paper across the table, a financial proposal, a larger property in a better neighborhood, an expanded trust fund for the children with conditions attached, a monthly arrangement that was frankly more money than most people earn in a year. He was offering to pay my silence. Dress it up however you like, it was a purchase. He was buying my peace so he could keep his. I looked at that paper, and then I looked at him, and something in me, something I didn't even know was still standing, finally broke. Not in grief, in clarity. The fog lifted and I saw everything exactly as it was, not as I had wanted it to be. I pushed the paper back across the table. I said, I don't want your money, Nathaniel. I wanted you, and you have been choosing everything else since the day I met you. He didn't argue, he just nodded slowly, like a man who had known this moment was coming and was relieved it had finally arrived. After he left that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat up until 4 a.m. just thinking, not crying, just thinking, trying to understand not just what had happened between us, but why. Because here is what I eventually came to understand. Nathaniel was not a monster. He genuinely cared about me. He genuinely loved his children. But he was also a man who had been raised inside a system, a family structure, a class structure, a social expectation that had already written the story of his life before he ever walked into that gala. His family had already identified a woman from their circle, same background, same connections, same kind of family name, everything already arranged in that quiet, polished way that old money arranges things, not with force, but with expectation, and expectation in that world is more powerful than force. Race was part of it. I am not going to pretend otherwise, and I am not going to be polite about it. A Black woman, regardless of her education, her success, her intelligence, her grace, she was not what his world considered a suitable public partner for a man of his standing. Not because of anything written down, not because anyone said it out loud, but because that world has its own language and its own rules, and one of those rules is that certain things simply are not done. He knew it. He had always known it, and instead of fighting it, instead of choosing differently, he chose to have both. He chose the comfort of loving me in private and the safety of meeting his family's expectations in public. He chose to split himself in half and hand me the broken piece. That is not love, that is management, and I had been confusing the two for 3 years. I called a lawyer the next morning. Not because I wanted war, not because I wanted to hurt him or expose him or burn his world down. I called a lawyer because I had 2 children who deserved to know exactly who they were and where they came from. They deserved his name. They deserved to be legally recognized, not managed from a distance with a trust fund and conditions. The process was not easy. His legal team was expensive and well-practiced, but I was not asking for anything unreasonable. I was asking for my children to have their father's name on their birth records, for the inheritance they were entitled to, for formal documentation of what he owed them, not me, them. And we got it, every single thing. Nathaniel did not fight it in the end. I think somewhere in him he knew it was right. He continued to be present in the children's lives. He still visited. He still showed up for birthdays. The children still loved him and he loved them. But on paper, in the eyes of the world and the law, Lena and Samuel were no longer a secret. As for me, I turned down the house, I turned down the monthly arrangement, I turned down every offer that came with conditions about my silence or my behavior or where I could be seen and with whom. I went back to my business. I worked harder than I had ever worked. I expanded to Nairobi and then to Lagos. I hired a team of 12 women, most of them young, most of them brilliant, all of them building something that belonged entirely to them. I did not let this story make me bitter. I could have. I had every right to. But bitterness is just grief that has stopped moving, and I refused to stop moving. I chose myself, loudly, deliberately, and without apology. I have shared this story because I think it matters, not as gossip, not as a cautionary tale about dating wealthy men, but as a mirror. This story is about what happens when a woman is loved but not chosen. And there is a difference, a devastating, important difference between those two things. Being loved means someone enjoys your presence, desires your company, values what you bring. Being chosen means someone is willing to stand in front of the world and say, "This is my person, this is my life." You can be deeply loved and still not be chosen. And when that happens, especially to Black women, the world often asks them to be grateful for the love and to stop asking for the choice. It asks them to love in silence and hurt in private, to accept beautiful arrangements that look like love from the outside but feel like cages from the inside, to be the hidden heart of a life that belongs to someone else. And that is not a personal failure. That is a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Nathan is not unique. He is not special in his cruelty because his cruelty was not loud. It was quiet and expensive and wrapped in genuine affection. And that kind of cruelty is the hardest to name, which is exactly why I am naming it now. There is also karma in this story, and I want you to pay attention to it, because the arrangement his family chose for him, the carefully selected woman from the right background, that marriage happened. And within 3 years, it became one of the most publicly painful divorces in their country's social circles. His business reputation took damage from the proceedings. His carefully protected image cracked in ways that no private arrangement could fix. The very thing he had protected at my expense, his name, his standing, his world, was damaged not by me, but by the choice he made instead of me. I am not glad about that pain, but I will not pretend I didn't notice it. Lena and Samuel are 5 now. They are loud and funny and relentlessly curious. Samuel wants to be a pilot. Lena wants to be a vet, specifically for elephants. She is very clear about that. They call their father on weekends, and they know his face and he knows theirs. And within the small, imperfect world they have built around those children, there is a kind of peace. As for me, I am good. I am genuinely, quietly, deeply good, not because everything worked out perfectly, but because I finally stopped measuring my worth by whether someone chose me and started measuring it by what I chose for myself. This is the thing I want to leave you with. You are not asking for too much when you ask to be chosen. You are not being difficult when you refuse a love that only exists in private. You are not the problem when someone's system, their family, their fear, their world decides you are not the right fit. That is not a verdict on your value. It is information about their limitations. Do not let someone's inability to choose you become a story you tell about yourself. You deserve a love that is not ashamed of you. You deserve to be someone's first answer, not their best-kept secret. If this story moved you, if it said something you needed to hear today, share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we are not done telling these stories. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this hit you the hardest. I read every single one. I will see you in the next one.